Welcome to Fresh Off the Boat. Today's guest is Srijan Sood, a student I've worked with when he was in St. Columbus School in New Delhi in 2012-13. That's when you went to Georgia Tech. There was no doubt that you would be pursuing computer science because the kind of stuff you were doing already in high school was quite amazing. And so I just wanted to know, when you got there, what was it like settling in academically? What resources did you use, and what set that as a tone for things that you did in the future?
Thanks, Arjun. Thanks. Yeah. All great questions, and I think these all I think essentially form my entire freshman experience. So overall, settling in was a lot easier than I expected. I think thanks to just a great support group overall. So whether it be my family, my parents, or friends, I think that transition is very important. So making some early connections as soon as you arrive to a new place, that's really essential, and that set the pace for me. So as soon as I got there, I was a part of a living learning community. So it's called the Grand Challenges program, and it's why it's living learning is because it's 110 students who all live in the same dorm, and you're also taking a lot of classes together, and it's about this particular research aspect called the Grand Challenges program, where you're trying to come up with solutions to solve humanity's grand challenges. So because of this living learning community, it was really easy to make friends and connections in the early days. And coming to the US from India, it was great to have a support system from the get-go. So I'd say that helped me both, just get used to the city of Atlanta, the U.S. education system, which in some ways is very different from the Indian education system. So I remember when I took English one as a freshman, the kind of English classes we have back in high school in the CBSE system in India, compared to writing classes in the US, it's a complete different ballgame. And initially I had no real idea of what the professors really expected, and I think that's when a lot of your friends who are from the US, they really helped me understand what needs to be done. And another example I have is actually to do with US history. So as part of our global civics and social studies requirement, we got an option to choose from multiple classes. So I've always been interested in history, so I thought, why not also learn the US side of it? And this definitely sounds very naive now, but one of the things I asked my professor was that I don't really get the setting of the American independence struggle. Growing up in India and reading a lot about colonialism and how that really went down. Here it's kind of different, where a bunch of colonial settlers came from the UK to the US, and I didn't really get the concept of how they were trying to declare independence from themselves, right? So just as a young high school graduate, that setting was so strange to me. And thankfully I had great faculty, right? And they actually pointed out that I wasn't the first international student to come up with these questions, and they even encouraged me to switch from the multiple choice question format in the exams to an essay format. And while that sounds very counterintuitive, that actually helped me learn a lot. And it was just one of the experiences I still remember, as
Right. Very
one of
well
the.
said, actually. And given the current situation in the US, where cities are in a flame and there's rioting on the streets, uh, there's a lot of pent up racial tension. And obviously, history teaches us so many things. So,
Mhm.
very fascinating as an introduction to your freshman year and your perspectives. Still, I think being naive is important, even in this time, even after you've done a master's degree now. So we'll learn more about that, and also the interlinkages. I think it's a good way that you've set it up. That fine, you did. I know that you studied computer science not at undergrad, but also at master's level at Georgia Tech. Uh, but the fact that you're interested in social sciences makes it even more fascinating. Going forward, how Georgia Tech is kind of that gender imbalanced school where you have these nerds and geeks sort of working on machines, building stuff. Uh, what was it like for you to choose computer science and find your specialty and your place in the world through the teaching assistantships and future internships and jobs that you pursued?
So I'd say that most of my personal growth during my college years actually happened in the summers that I was interning, right? Like after each summer, I could really, look back and see how I've grown in multiple ways. And my first internship was in San Diego at Qualcomm, which is a chip manufacturing and a chip design company. And back then, my freshman year, I was actually a computer engineering major. So, it's a mix between electrical engineering and computer science because I was still pretty indecisive about, what I kind of want to do. I know I like computer science, I like coding, but I also like the hardware aspect, right? So it was always this back and forth between which classes to take. So I just picked a major that would let me do both. But then during my first internship, I actually realized that the hardware aspect was more of a hobby for me. Like I love to do some of that stuff and I still continue to do that. But studying it wasn't really what I was passionate about. And I could really see that when I took some intro computer science classes as electives, right? Because these were the classes that would be my fun work, right? Whenever I wanted to take a break from my electrical engineering work, I'd end up doing some computer science work. I'd end up helping other students who were taking classes I hadn't taken yet. And that was kind of an indication to me that maybe I should switch over. And my first internship really, guided me that way. So I had some great mentors at Qualcomm, and they actually, while my internship project was to do with writing code, they enabled me to see what really happens in the hardware industry, right? So I was able to go into some of these labs at Qualcomm where they were developing processors, and how do they actually develop it? How do they test it on a day-to-day basis? And that entire pipeline. And while fascinating, that's when I kind of realized that that's something I'm still interested in, but that's not what I'd like to focus majority of my time on. So I think my first internship, had this milestone of, a year and a half into college of kind of making me realize what I want to do.
Great. So computer science is generally a capped major. So, but switching from computer engineering, was that easy for you? You meet certain requirements, meet advisors, and then switch?
Yeah, thankfully at Georgia Tech they make it pretty straightforward. So luckily I'd already taken the intro CS classes as electives. So just because I was interested in them, and I kind of foresaw that even like for example, if I'm going to be a junior and if I want to take CS courses as an electrical engineering major, I'd still need to get the prerequisites done. So luckily, I had some of the prereqs covered. And overall, I think if you meet some very basic GPA requirements, they really help you to switch. And they even have this kind of transition clause that if you're a transfer major, change of major, or any other sort of circumstance, they really kind of
Right.
welcome you to the major and cover that first year.
So how does the typical computer science major requirement sort of progress? As a layman, how would you describe that to someone who doesn't know, or even the different paths you can choose eventually, whether it's app dev, web dev, machine learning, data science, AI, etc., or other Internet of Things in other areas. In your mind, how did that pan out, and what is it? What do other students do who are maybe unlike you?
So initially at Georgia Tech, all engineering or science majors have to take a computing class. So what the class covers remains pretty consistent, but for computer science majors, it's taught. Hi.
Yeah. So this is the
So yeah,
first episode where we have my daughter being
I
featured.
see. I
Sunday
see.
out here. So yeah, it's great.
Please do
Stanya.
come. Yes. Yeah. How is she doing in the quarantine?
Oh, she's actually great. I mean, we go down to play, so we get to maintain social distance and do stuff. But yeah, go on. I think let's go
That's
back to.
all right. Yeah. So as I was saying, the computing requirement is there for all engineering or science majors, but just the tool, the language that you study it in changes. So all engineering majors take a class in MATLAB, whereas the CS majors take a class in Python. So everyone is kind of introduced to the world of computing. But after that, the computer science majors have multiple streams. So you were mentioning topics like, Internet of Things, machine learning, systems, databases, and these are called threads in the Georgia Tech curriculum. So overall, the undergraduate department offers 8 threads, and to graduate, you end up picking 2 threads, right? So that kind of allows you to cater your computer science degree to whichever aspect you like the most, right? So there are a lot of people that like the web aspect or the app dev aspect. That there's a complete pillar for that, right? So everyone has the same core classes. So of course, everyone studies things like introduction to programming, data structures and algorithms, advanced algorithms, databases. But after that, what you choose to specialize in is completely up to you. So the pillars I ended up picking were artificial intelligence and embedded devices. So even though I'd switched my major, I thought I could still kind of hold on to a little of that hardware bit. And artificial intelligence is something I've always been interested in. So this kind of let me combine the two. So I could also take classes that, can I build? So for example, things like robotics, right? They lie at the intersection of, physical embedded devices and artificial intelligence. So there were classes that I could take that satisfied both the pillars, but really helped me kind of cater my degree towards that very specific niche where I wanted to go.
Okay, great. So if you were to look at activities that were beyond class at Georgia Tech, I know you were a busy student. There were so many challenges, companies setting up initiatives and competitions, uh, also joining clubs and organizations, which led to maybe international sort of or national level activities. Can you describe a few opportunities that you signed up for?
Sure, yeah. So I'd say initially the biggest one would be as a part of the Grand Challenges Living Learning community. So the first year was more of this training phase where we were taught how to really tackle these, research problems or design related problems, and how to take the consumer or customer centric view, and how do you really define this whole setting. But when we went into the sophomore year, now it was optional for us to whether we really wish to continue with the program. And me with a couple of other friends, we ended up doing that, right? So we could have whatever our idea was, and in this case, we focused on virtual reality. We built prototypes and solutions to existing problems out there. So then it was up to us to kind of define what was this problem and how will we be solving it, and then how do we really want to sell the solution. And it's not necessarily sell in the business sense, but how do you convince someone that this solution is relevant. And as a part of that, the program was really supportive, right? Our class size was literally a class of 4, right? It was our team of 4 meeting twice a week with our professor, who was really teaching us how to write our proposals, how connecting us with faculty within the school that our problem was focused on. So while we were working on a computer science problem, so there were CS faculty we could interact with, there were people working on problems within the sustainable energy space, right? So we could, and that's also one of the problems I was involved with towards the end of my freshman year. We got to meet with the school's leader of public policy and the person in charge of the school's layout and building design. So whatever LEED certified buildings we had on the campus, how did they really make sure that Georgia Tech was a leader in the city of Atlanta and overall into sustainable building and just the smart grid and all of these technologies. So I'd say that was a big portion.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's fascinating. And then going forward with your plans to pursue a master's degree eventually, and then leading to your current job at JPMorgan, which is fascinating. It's to kind of intersection between finance and AI. So tell us a little bit more about that journey, grad school plus the different jobs that you pursued.
Sure. So I'd say that throughout my undergrad career, it was my internships that kind of guided me towards, what specific niche I wanted to pursue, and into realizing that research is something I'm really passionate about. So, my first internship, which was software engineering, leading on to more of a data engineering role, followed by a machine learning internship, that kind of made me realize that, okay, machine learning is something I'm passionate about. And that's why in late junior year, I ended up opting for the thesis option. So the computer science program at Georgia Tech gives you multiple options for your capstone. And the traditional option is that you work with a company, and it's a 2-semester project where you're paired with different students in your cohort, and then you try solving this problem for this company. I opted for the thesis route, where I work with a faculty member over the course of 3 semesters to work on a specific problem, and then I have to write a thesis on it. So the topic that my thesis was on is a subfield of machine learning called reinforcement learning, and in specific, it was about intelligent reward design and task specification for AI problems. So that's how I really got into the artificial intelligence space. And after my undergrad finished, I was looking for jobs, and progressively over my undergrad career, I'd worked for a smaller company each summer, and I realized at that point that startups were something I was really fascinated with, right? And they really gave me this flexibility of controlling the end-to-end pipeline, right? So everything from the back end, so designing an algorithm, to the other side, that how does it really solve a customer's problem, right? I wanted to be in charge of all of those segments, and that's why I ended up joining a startup, which was just a group of 4 people. So it was a startup out of Stanford's MBA program. So Stanford has this, I wouldn't call it venture capital, but they have this, seed money fund for their own students, where they fund startups from whether they're undergrad or their graduate schools. Um, and that was a startup that I joined, which used machine learning in the space of satellite imagery. So if we have images of, for example, farmland, right, can I figure out what's growing there? And then, given a time series of these images, can I predict what crop yield in Shelby, Iowa will look like next year? Or I see weather patterns changing. I see that there's a hurricane that struck somewhere. Do I know if oats production in Saskatchewan, Canada will change, right? And then further, once we know this can be used for many downstream tasks. So primarily used by both governments and food corporations for risk management and supply chain, but also by commodities traders, right? So
Fascinating. So you worked for over 2 years at Area of Intelligence.
About a year,
Okay.
and towards the end of that year, I decided that I wanted to pursue some more research. I really wanted to get my hands dirty and figure out, how does the academic side of research work, and that's when I decided to go back to Georgia Tech to pursue my master's. So this was in mid 2018 when I started my master's
So
program.
when you started your master's, it was purely with an intent to learn more about machine learning, artificial intelligence,
Exactly.
and topics.
Exactly. So I definitely seen some of the applied side. I'd started, dipping my feet in this world of research with my undergrad thesis, but I really wanted to see, within, when you start graduate school, you hit this point where you kind of now know how much you don't know, and I think that's what I was looking for, right? So before I started my master's, I knew the space that I'm interested in, but within that, where do I want to go from there? So I really needed to know how much I don't know to make any moves.
Yeah, typically the job market for computer science graduates is so hot that very often students do not think of doing a master's. The ones who do end up thinking of it as an academia or a research sort of position. So it kind of, the new job that you have with JPMorgan, uh, does that give you a blend of both? Like you can continue to learn and do things at the same time, apply it
Precisely.
in the industry. So tell us more about this initiative. What does the company do? What department are you sort of helping solve problems for?
Sure, yeah. So just as some context, reinforcement learning is what I'd studied in my undergrad, and I decided to pursue that in my master's. And one of my master's projects was about seeing if we can use reinforcement learning to train stock trading agents. So, given a history of the market, so whether these are intraday or intraday, can I actually create agents that, given this feed of, real-time stock data, can they actually learn to, play this entire game? right? And that's how I got interested in finance. And the professor that I was working with, Dr. Tucker Balch from Georgia Tech, he advised me to take one of the MBA school's classes, one of their investment classes, just so that I've started learning about, and I kind of know about the machine learning side of things, but also to be informed about the business side. And that really piqued my interest in this intersection. And luckily what was happening was that very year, JP Morgan hired Dr. Manuela Veloso, who was the head of the machine learning department at Carnegie Mellon, to start JP Morgan's AI research wing, right? There's a lot of AI and machine learning happening at JP Morgan, but with this team, it was labeled as a research team. So, while the mandate of our team is to conduct a lot of novel research in applications, that span the entire bank, we also have a mandate to now publish, to interact with academia, to participate in multiple research conferences, to kind of give back to the academic community. So, just as for some context, J.P. Morgan Chase is, I believe, the U.S.'s largest bank, and so JP Morgan was an investment bank and Chase Manhattan was a consumer bank, and they merged, now a few years back. And now it's just this large behemoth of a bank that has so many different aspects under it. So everything from investment banking, which covers things like mergers and acquisitions, to consumer banking. So Chase, which is, one of the most prominent, if you walk in any prominent American city, you'll see Chase ATMs all over, to things like asset and wealth management. So all of these different pillars, but now with a growing interest in artificial intelligence and these new slew of machine learning techniques, I think the bank really wanted to see how can they, be future forward. How do they really, see banking change? Like, can they disrupt the industry before someone else disrupts them?
Pretty
Um,
interesting. So I'm sure there are interesting products in the pipeline,
uh-huh.
and the banking industry would be better off with all of the work that you're putting in, and your team and everyone else there is putting in. The future of banking is changing. The future of education is changing. Yeah, coming back to education though, during these COVID times, people have had to reimagine things. Colleges are still uncertain how things will be in the next semester or in spring. In your view, was Georgia Tech a place which was a bit more future ready? Because they always had blended classes and even their
I
master's
would
programs.
definitely, I would definitely say so. So, I think Georgia Tech's online masters in CS program, was one of the first programs of its kind. So I think it was covered very heavily by the Obama administration, and it was something that my undergrad advisor was very heavily involved in, and that's why, that's when I kind of got introduced to the whole concept. And now it's a massive program, right? And I have the privilege of having some more insight into this as also a teaching assistant. So while I have TA'd some on-campus classes at Georgia Tech, in my master's I also TA'd a class called Machine Learning for Trading, which is taught both on campus and online. So thankfully I got to engage with students in both aspects that were technically a part of the same classroom, right? Same exams, same course material, same homework, same TAs, right? And I really got to see how different students interact, whether it's undergrad students taking this class, on campus graduate students, or online students, right? And I have to tell you, Arjun, I think some of the stories as a TA, some of the students that I interacted with, it was pretty astounding, right? So there were people who had two PhDs and just wanted to learn for the sake of learning, and were doing this. There were people who were working in software engineering roles but still wanted to further their knowledge and thought getting a master's online is a pretty great idea while pursuing a full-time job. um, and everyone in between. And it really kind of opened my eyes to you know things that are not part of this normal student experience, right? So growing up in India and being privileged enough to attend a very fine high school, and then having the privilege to come to the US for my undergrad and then again for my master's, I was exposed to this very traditional route of education. And then on the other side, as a TA, I'm getting an email from my student saying that, Can you please extend my homework deadline? I'm actually in the hospital and I had to deliver my baby early. So this woman, she had delivered her baby that very day, and she asked me for a couple of hours of an extension. And what I am used to in that kind of context is that if I've scraped my knee, professor, can I please get a week off? And here I am, having students who are, they have these things, of course, but it just kind of opened my eyes to things that are non-traditional.
So it kind of lets more people included in higher ed, and Georgia Tech obviously set that as a good example. But what do you think campuses could do to take that kind of experiences of running successful online programs and also providing some sort of social dynamic, not replacing obviously the in-person activities, clubs, organizations? For example, how would Grand Challenges change as a program if it was all online?
So yeah, these are very interesting questions, and while I'm nowhere of an expert on policy or any of these things, just some things I realized are viewing. I think we have to view these non-traditional aspects in a very different light, right? That um, they're not second tier in any way, right? I think sometimes we have this vision of whatever's traditional, whatever's normal is the way to go, but we have to see how these things can add value. So for example, one of the things that I saw was off campus, or well, online students were really adding value to the degrees of the on-campus students, right? So one thing that you take for granted when you're on campus is interaction, right? So a lot of students study in groups, right? And it could be a group of two, three, or it could be just study groups of 10 people. But having said that, there's also people who prefer to just work alone. And there are a lot of these online forums or discussion portals. I think the major company that does this is called Piazza. And most colleges that I know of have Piazza for their classes. And it's basically an online forum where students can ask questions and they can answer other students' questions, or you wait for a professor or a teaching assistant to answer your query. And these can be actual technical questions or just more logistic things about the logistical aspects of the class. But these forums tend to die down rather quickly on some of the on-campus classes, right? Because some of the reasons could be that people who need this information are already working in study groups, right? They already have it covered. But at the same time, if there are people who commute, for example, who don't live on campus, or people who just don't do well in group settings, they miss out on some of these things. And what I noticed in many of these online classes were that the off-campus students, this is their way to interact. And on top of the Piazza, they've also set up things like an unofficial Slack, so more of a real-time communication aspect. And they have so much to talk about that it really benefits the in-person students, right? So the online students are asking all of these questions and they're sharing interesting tidbits and things that are not necessarily related to the curriculum but still very relevant. And it's
Super.
kind of the
Yeah,
synthesis of the two
it's kind of
that
the online hive mind,
exactly.
right? So yeah, that's fascinating though, and I think your ability to simplify things and present them is yeah, it's also great. So yeah, there is future for online education. It's already proven at institutions like Georgia Tech. It can't be that bad. Instead of not getting education, at least as one semester, if students have to do this, there are ways to make it an engaging academic and social experience, albeit a bit different, but yes, possibly a way forward. Now, switching gears, a little bit about you and your, we'll get to know you as a person. So,
Sure.
rapid fire. The
Okay.
first question is can you think of an embarrassing moment, mistake, or failure in high school or college or grad school or at work that you learned something from?
Sure, yeah. The learn something aspect can be a bit tricky, but I had a tendency to pull, I wouldn't say pull all nighters. I definitely got my hours of sleep, just that I was sleeping when everyone else was awake, right? So we had these superlative awards at the end of my freshman year, and I was awarded the night owl, right? So I got this big a box of Folgers coffee because my tendency was just to kind of stay awake at night, socialize in the lounge, do my work then, and then go to sleep in the morning. And as a result, there might have been a few exams that I fell asleep in, and I had a couple of my friends and other students kind of kicking at my chair to really wake me up. So yeah, that would be some embarrassing moments, but that definitely, I think it taught me two things. One, that I need to manage my time better, but it also kind of showed me that everyone has different styles of working, right? And sometimes there is this one standard that most students conform to, but n- just because it doesn't work for you doesn't really mean that you have to force yourself to conform to that, right? There are so many things you can do in college, so many ways to get help, and so many ways to just branch out and do what makes you operate at your best. And I think I'm really glad that these are some of the things I learned in college.
Super. So I think with that, we want to wrap things up. But thank you again, Srijan, for such a wonderful and authentic and honest conversation. We will definitely want to invite you, given time zone different permits, on a panel to discuss not just your interest in CS AI, but in general, share more life gyan with our student community. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Arjun. Thank you. Take care.